Howdy, Larken Rose here. Time for the daily rant. 6 years and something ago, I wrote an article called Communism's Soul. And then I rehashed it a few years later when Obama was running for office. So I thought I'd just do a ad-lib kind of explanation of what that was about. Because invariably, when you talk about anarchism, anarcho-communists will show up and whine about how if you're an anarcho-capitalist, you're not really an anarchist, unless you're against hierarchy and money and trade and capitalism and whatever else we want to make up. The term anarchist just means no ruling class, ruled by no one. So to be a real quote-unquote anarchist, all it means is you oppose the existence of a ruling class. But in addition to that, there's the question of, well, what do you think determines rightful property ownership? And really, that is the distinction between communism and capitalism. And most people who call themselves communists aren't even clear on the distinctions themselves and can't really say what they believe. But it comes down to this. The premise of communism, the way Marx put it is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, which basically means you don't get the fruits of your labor. You have to produce as much as you can from each according to his ability, and then you get whatever you need from the collective. So everybody works for the collective, and then the collective hands out stuff one way or another based on how much everybody needs. So there's a bunch of ways to show that while that sounds nice on the surface, it doesn't actually make any sense. And when you try to get down to the principle involved, it just turns into an utter mess. So consider this example. And there's a million ways to ask this, but this is one I often ask. I'll ask a self-described communist. Okay, you and I are on an island. It's a big island. There are lots of resources. You make a bow and arrow. I do a different version with a hut and stuff. But you make a bow and arrow, and it takes you all day, and you have to find just the right kind of tree, and you have to find a vine that you can twirl around and make into a string that works, and then make a straight arrow, and find something to make an arrowhead out of, and you do all that all day. And then the first question is, does the fact that you made it give you a higher claim to it? Does it mean it's yours? Or does my need for a bow and arrow, because, they're over in this stream over here, there are fish, but I can't catch them by hand because they're too fast, so I need your bow and arrow. Does my need entitle me to it? Now, to each according to his need says it's mine. That's the basis of communism. I need it, therefore it's mine. Of course, if you also need it, therefore it's also yours. And that doesn't work, because then you have two people who need something, and therefore two people who own it, and only one person at a time can use it. Instantly, you have a massive conflict. The free market voluntarist capitalist version is, you made it, it's yours. So the thing that comes after that is, well, what if you make that bow and you tell me that I can borrow it as long as whatever fish I catch using the bow and arrow you made, we split 50-50. Is that okay? Is that oppressive? Is there anything immoral about you making that offer? And to be consistent, a communist would have to say, yes, that's bad, because that is capitalism in a nutshell. You now possess the means of production, the bow and arrow, and you're exploiting my labor for letting me use the means of production, and I get some of the results and you get some of the results. You just get to sit around while I use your bow and arrow to enrich you and me. That is exactly what communists complain about. That is capitalism in a nutshell. You have a thing that is yours, and you use your ownership of that thing to make a deal with me, and my labor plus the thing you own, the capital, equals a certain amount of stuff of value, profit. And then we split it. And so a communist whines, hey, I have a right to that bow and arrow because it's the means of production, and I need it to get food, and it's oppressive for you. So I asked the question, like, first of all, are you oppressing me by making the bow and arrow? Because you just created inequality. Before, we had nice equality because I didn't have a bow and arrow and you didn't have a bow and arrow. Then you made one which created inequality. Now, is that oppressing me for you to make something? Duh. And the honest answer that a communist would have to give is yes, because you just made inequality. But none of them want to answer that way because it's so patently ridiculous. The next thing is, if you offer to let me borrow the bow if we split whatever I catch, is that oppressive? Like, you're not making me do anything. You're saying you can use my bow and arrow if you go and if I get half of the fish you catch. Is that oppressive for you to make that offer? To be honest and consistent, a communist would have to say, yes, that's oppressive. The bow is mine. Give it to me because I need it. And the funny thing is, in this most simple scenario where there's tons of resources, there's only two people, and there's one thing they both need, communists can never specifically and honestly answer the questions. Like, you cannot make a more simple, obvious scenario, and yet they can't answer the questions. And then they want to talk about how 7 billion people are going to divvy up the whole planet and everything on it, because their philosophy is so great that it can be done, that it can solve that entire equation, but it can't solve two people in one thing. Because they always flounder around. And communists consistently complain, well, it's very complicated. So in what way is this complicated? You made a bow, I didn't. There's two of us, there's fish in the stream. That's too complicated to talk about. But international trade, that you got covered. Yeah, that communism can handle really easily, but two guys and one thing. Nope, that's beyond, that's way too sophisticated. And so you get these long-winded answers from communists that don't actually answer, but go on and on about, and they, routinely change the question. Well, I would share. Well, that's nice. That's not what I asked. If for you to share, that's nice. But for you to share that bow means it's yours. Is it yours to decide whether to share it or not? Or is it mine because I need it? Because it's completely consistent with capitalism to say, yes, it's mine because I made it, and I'll let you use it for a while. That is not consistent with communism, because it starts with, it is mine because I made it. And so you get these long-winded obfuscations in the simplest scenario imaginable, because there is no way to make it into a consistent philosophy. And the reason this matters, and some people will say, well, if some people want to be anarcho-communists and some want to be anarcho-capitalists, why does it matter? And I say, well, if you're going to leave me alone, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to leave you alone too. But if you think your quote-unquote need entitles you to the product of my efforts, then no, we can't get along, because you're going to come steal whatever I make and say it's for the collective and the common good, and this is fair sharing and fair distribution and whatever crap you want to make up to try to make your theft sound good and make it sound philosophical. Now, some communists will say, no, it'll be all voluntary, and we want to get a group of people together who will share everything. My response to that is, okay, it still probably won't work, but I'm not going to stop you. Like, if you're not trying to force me into your plan, that's perfectly fine. But it's interesting to watch how it plays out in real life. Oh, and somebody just posted a thing, I think it was yesterday, talking about when he was in a commune. And like this little group of, hey, we all pitch in and then you just take what you need. And like the head of this, I don't know that they call themselves a commune, but the head of this little group, he said, like, so I would make all this stuff and the head guy would just take it all. It's like, oh, wait, you just took all of everything I made. Well, I needed it. And that's often how it goes, because if you actually believe that need determines ownership, then the one who wins is going to be the one who's the neediest. Well, I need a lot of stuff, and I do a great job of arguing how much I need stuff. And of course, the moment you have two people who want one thing, they're both going to say they need it, and instantly you have a conflict that doesn't exist in the self-ownership model, because it doesn't matter that you want it, I made it, therefore it's mine. I might lend it to you voluntarily, but that's up to me. I have, to own something means you have the exclusive right to decide what is done with it. And so there are a zillion situations that happen every day that capitalism or free market or self-ownership or whatever you want to call it handles perfectly fine. Like, I made it, it's mine. I might give you some, I might borrow some, we might do a trade, we might do a voluntary exchange, whatever, but you don't get to steal it from me just because you say you need it. And from the simplest example to the most complicated, it doesn't work when you try to apply communist philosophy to it. It just turns into a mess and nobody owns anything. And then you get the fact that there's no incentive to be productive. Like, if I work my butt off and make a thing, and the fact that I work my butt off has nothing to do with who gets to use it, that's just determined by need, why did I just do all that? Like, if I want a chair, I have to make a chair for everyone else in the world who wants one before I get to have one. Because if somebody else can say, I need it more than you, oops, all right, there goes all my effort on that. Start again, whoops, somebody else decided they need it. And it's weird, the communists are often so muddle-headed in what they're even trying to criticize. Because they'll say, so you just want every man for himself. And just, what? No, duh. Trade, by definition, is not every man for himself. It's people exchanging things they have, which is people getting along. I talked before about, the whole win-win thing. If two people decide to trade, it's because they both wanted what the other one had more than what they had. So both sides benefit, both sides become richer in the trade, or they wouldn't do it. And so a discussion happened today with some whiny communist who was, and I was saying a thing I often bring up, like, look around you. The furniture, the computer, the toys, the house, the everything. How much of that exists because somebody thought, because somebody really cares about you and made it for your benefit? And the answer is probably almost none of it. And how much of it exists because somebody else thought, if I make these and sell these, I'll make money for myself? The people who built the house, whether they built it when you were there or whatever, they built it because somebody paid them. They didn't build it to be nice to you. The people who designed and built that computer didn't do it to be nice to you. They did it to make money for themselves. You got rich in the process because that's what free market and voluntary exchange does. If you want to get somebody else's money in a free society, the only way to do it is make something they want to buy, which means enrich them. Enrich yourself by enriching them. Both people get richer. And so the whole notion that, well, that's greedy. Like, well, who cares? Like, if you want to label that as greedy, that, oh, the people who made this computer just did it for their own profit. Well, what do I care? I ended up with a computer that was worth more than the money I gave them, which is why I gave them the money. If we both got richer, why do I care whether they were greedy or not? And so I got into this debate with this commie bonehead who just wouldn't acknowledge that the massive amount of wealth created by self-interest, by all the people working to get money themselves so they can have the things they want. And it doesn't mean you have to be a bastard about it. It doesn't mean you don't help out people who deserve it and things like that. It just means you serve yourself. If you don't serve yourself at all, you starve to death. Like, it comes down to that. Like, oh, everything I do is for other people. Well, then you'll be dead in a week because you'll never bother to put food in your mouth because that would be for you. But so their complaints and their arguments are really vague and weird. So the discussion got to the point where I said, because the commie guy said, if not for capitalism, we would have way better computers even. And, anybody can just make up whatever they want. And he seemed to be in making stuff up mode. And I said, you really think you and 100 commie buddies of yours could make from scratch a microprocessor without any profit motive of anybody involved? You're each just kind of pitching in and working for the collective. You think you're going to come up with a microprocessor, and in fact, a whole computer. Nice freaking joke. Because technology like that is so intricate and specialized that who is going to sit around building, I'll build this tiny little component or this piece of this machine that makes that little part of a microprocessor. And I'm just going to do that out of the kindness of my heart, hoping that somebody somewhere else will, out of the kindness of his heart, make some other thing to make another piece that can go along with that piece. And if a million different people do a million different things, maybe just out of blind luck and out of all of us caring about the collective, poof, we'll have a computer. No, it doesn't at all work that way. And so I challenged the guy, said, yeah, see if you and 100 of your commie buddies in a year can make just a basic electronic calculator, the kind you can get for like $5 thanks to capitalism. And you don't get tools or anything. You have to start all the way from scratch. You don't just get to buy the components already made by well, it's not a free market, but by a voluntary exchange, despite the state robbing everybody in the process. And the idea that that ever would have happened by people just, I'll just kind of do something for my neighbor. I think today for my neighbor, I'm going to work really hard on designing a really tiny part that by itself is utterly worthless. But if lots of other people happen to design other parts, and apparently there's no master design telling any of us to do any of this, that suddenly we'll all put them together and go, golly, look what we did for the collective. We invented the computer. And it just, the vagueness of people's complaints and their positions is just amazing. Because there was this other woman who was saying, oh, there's greed. The problem is greed. Greed is evil, evil capitalists. And I was trying to get her to distinguish, well, what counts as greed? It's wanting things more than you need and more than you deserve. And I said, well, okay, those are really damn vague terms. More than you need, because guess what? You don't need that computer in front of you, so why do you have it? You cannot even pretend that you can't survive without that computer in front of you, which means you don't need it. So why do you have it? And if you think you deserve it, like, how do you justify that? You're richer, you being the commie lady, you're richer than 90% of the world. And you're richer than kings were a couple centuries ago. And so how do you pretend that you need and deserve all that under your definitions of what those words even mean? And she has no idea and flounders around. Well, then it comes out that she runs a business. And she says, well, I and the people who work for me all benefit. We all share in the profits. Like, wait a minute. The profits, that's from other people. You're selling something. That's capitalism. That's trading. You're doing exactly what you just complained about and what you just condemned. And the thing is, communists don't even know what they're complaining about. And partly they see bad stuff going on. They don't understand what the actual badness is and why it's immoral and why it's destructive. So they blame it on greed because that's always a convenient thing. Well, I don't care if somebody's greedy. If they don't initiate violence, their greed is probably going to enrich me. And it has. And I look around at all the stuff I have, the vast majority of it was made by people trying to enrich themselves. And what they had to do was make stuff that other people were willing to buy, including me. And so their quote-unquote greed made me richer. And that's just completely lost on communists. And they thought, and then they confuse capitalism with corporate fascism and talk about what we have now as if that's capitalism. And sometimes I just try to even throw the word out of the discussion, say, like, we're not using that word to mean the same thing, so let's have the discussion without that word. And then ask, if I produce a whole bunch of something myself, is a whole bunch of something mine? Does it belong to me? Oh, and she was saying, the whole problem is people are about mine, mine, mine. I was saying, self-ownership is the thing that matters. Because without the concept of self-ownership, you get the idea that you might have the ownership of somebody else. If you need something, you might have the right to enslave your neighbor to make him produce it for you. And that is the basis of communism, and that's why it turns into a giant, violent poverty fest. Because then it's an argument over who needs what. And golly, That always ends up with some central committee who decides what people need. Gee, that's not at all corruptible. So it's one of those things where, I assume that a lot of communists start with good intentions. They see injustice, like they see inequality, and they think inequality is the problem, which is just stupid. It's like, the thing on the island. If you made a bow, now we have inequality. How dare you? Like, you increase the wealth of one person. That's not somehow victimizing somebody else. And some other person I saw today or yesterday claiming that, well, under capitalism, for me to get richer, you have to get poorer, which is just so ignorant. Like, really? Okay, so the computer in front of me, so some poor person had this computer stolen from them. Is that how it works? Because I'm pretty sure this computer was manufactured. It used to be dirt. The computer in front of me used to be dirt. Now it's a computer. It wasn't stolen from anybody. But to get back to the guy who was saying we would have better computers, it just occurred to me, if somebody had tons of money, it would be so funny for somebody to make a reality show out of this and say, okay, 100 commies or 1,000 or whatever, you have to live here. You're not allowed to do trade that profits each other. Because even barter, I will do this if you do that. That's capitalism. That's free trade. That's free market. No, it all has to be altruistic, no profit motive. See if 1,000 of you or 100 or however many in a year can make a calculator from scratch. And the guy even said, oh, I'm tempted to go get my soldering irons. You didn't make the soldering iron. Capitalism made the soldering iron. You have to make your own freaking soldering iron and the electricity to power it. And I think it would be really interesting, but, it's never going to happen. It would be like, it's the only reality show I'd ever bother to watch. If somebody did a reality show where you start with a whole bunch of people, capitalists on one island or in one area and communists in another, and you say, the only rule is you have to abide by your system of what you believe in. Namely, the capitalists, they can still gift stuff and cooperate, but they're allowed to trade. They're not allowed to use coercion. So you're not allowed to say, I need that, and steal it. That's, you're disqualified. The communists aren't allowed to have means of production, and they're not allowed to do things for profit. They have to just do things for each other altruistically out of the kindness of their heart for the good of the collective and see which one does better. Now, historically, this has been done over and over and over again, and communism is always a gigantic disaster. But to have it in a controlled area to actually watch and see what happens, it's like, golly, the incentive to work your butt off when you don't get the fruits of your labor kind of isn't there. Look at all the people sitting around doing nothing, whining about how much they need. Meanwhile, the people over there are like, if I work my butt off to do this, that guy will give me some of that, and this guy will give me some of that, and I can trade for that and see how everything works. So, if somebody has $1 billion, they should totally make that into a reality show. 2 flavors of anarchy. You could call it 2 flavors of anarchy. Anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-communism. And people could see firsthand why the basis of communism is not only inherently irrational and immoral, but it's hugely destructive. And what it leads to is violence and poverty every time. Because if you determine ownership by need, you instantly have a zillion conflicts which cannot be resolved by your philosophy. 2 people both say they need something. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to violently fight over it, or somebody's going to feel gypped, and then nobody's going to want to be productive, and it turns into a mess. So it's really a challenge to take these people from, they start with a good premise they look at the system and go, this is unfair. There's some people who are just gajillionaires and they own the governments and they're doing this fascist stuff and, violently conquering things. And they think they lump all that in as capitalism when it isn't. But their response is, let's go with communism. And they don't understand that, well, yeah, that idea has been tried too. It's not new. It's not enlightened. It's not wise. It's old and stupid and nasty and has gotten hundreds of millions of people killed. So yeah, let's maybe not do that. But yeah, if somebody else out there has $1 billion, it'd be a really interesting economic and human nature study to see how well society could actually do. And you might get a little basic farming commune that could be sustainable, but you aren't going to get beyond that because, you know, you're not going to get calculators. Because to make a calculator, you have to have specialization. You have to have an overall plan. You have to have lots of people doing little tasks because somebody else is paying them to do it, because they're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. And you could, you know, you see that in the Soviet Union and Red China and all over the place, where we're doing it for the collective, and it becomes a giant disaster every time. So yeah, that would be the only reality show I would ever watch, is Two Flavors of Anarchy. But somehow I don't really think the communists would be lining up to try it.